This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 22nd of September, 2024. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. And we are already looking at the wrong thing. Darn it, that's what we wanted to look at, to see our beautiful faces on this fine Sunday afternoon. But that is the first thing, the first thing that we're going to talk about, which I think there may be a thread that runs through tonight's podcast. And I think that thread is the crisis of legitimacy that we're facing in so many areas. And the more I look around, the more I see evidence of that crisis. So let's actually go back to what we were going to start off with. So here's this fella that ran the COVID response in New York. He is a doctor, or New York City, yes, New York City's former COVID czar, Jay Varma. And as it turns out, while everybody else was being locked down, Jay Varma decided that he wanted to, how did he put it, blow off some steam because of the high pressure of his job. And what better way to blow off some steam than with a blow job? So he was holding sex parties at his house on at least 2 occasions in 2020. We're just finding out about it right now. And exactly. And I wonder if everybody there wore masks. We can only hope so. Yeah, so here is the headline from The Atlantic. Public health officials should have been talking about their sex parties the whole time. First of all, yeah, sure, because, details, please. Second of all, officials and their sex parties. Does that imply that this is an issue that goes beyond Jay Varma? Is it multiple officials having many sex parties? Interesting way of framing it. Down here at the bottom, messaging should be transparent. That was not the original subhead for this story because it's been screenshot on Twitter, and I think I can find it pretty quick. Actually, I'll just do a quick search for Jay Varma. I'm sorry, Varna, yes. And undercover lover, you got to leave it. You can't beat the New York Post's headline writers. But let's see, where was okay. Let's try this. Jay Varna, Atlantic. Because just before I came on, I saw it, and I saw that it had a different headline. Oh, yes. There we go. At least it would have shown that they're relatable. Because of all the... because of all the sex parties we all go to. See, he's just like us. He's having sex parties in his palatial home just to... Yeah, drug-fueled sex parties, as you do. But I guess they've decided that wasn't a great subhead, so they just decided messaging should be transparent. Because maybe this whole... Yeah, I mean, sure he's having sex parties. I mean, why would you expect otherwise? And yes, the problem is that he wasn't transparent, you see. And well, yeah, that's the problem. What world are you living in where this sex party thing is a messaging problem? Yeah, I don't think messaging is the issue here. I think the issue is, hold on.
Michael, you can't hear me.
Oh, shoot. My fault. I did not punch the button, Michael. That makes you audible.
That was probably the best intro we've had. 5-minute intro. That's probably the best 5-minute intro we've ever had.
5 minutes into it, and I didn't hit the stupid button. There's a lot of moving pieces, folks. That's all I can tell you. And sometimes I don't move the right pieces. So, well, we can't recapitulate it. So we'll just move on. And the first 5 minutes will be a disaster. How's that? So yeah, the problem is not transparency. The problem is that while we are not going to sex parties, and in fact are not being able to go see our parents who are dying in the hospital, or our kids who have
funerals,
leukemia,
or to church, or to graduations, yeah.
But he can have sex parties in his home, and that's perfectly fine because, after all, as he told us, the only way I can do this job for the city was if I had some way to blow off steam every now and then.
It's a hell of a way to blow off some steam.
Now, I'm not sure.
Fueled sex parties. I don't know why I didn't.
I'm not sure steam is what was being blown off, but okay.
Well, it's just like that guy. Was it Neil Ferguson in England, who was, straying out to have sex with his illicit lover, even though he was the one that was pushing all the COVID policy. I mean, this is nothing new. The hypocrisy lives. It's alive and well. Has not changed. Our betters get to do all the things that we cannot do because we're not trustworthy. But they know they're trustworthy.
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. I mean, that I think, when we talk about the crisis of legitimacy, which we talked about briefly last week when we talked about the media and not being able to know whether you're being told the truth or not. And I think at this point, it's probably safe to think that you aren't being told the truth.
Yeah.
Either they're just...
By anybody.
Yeah, either they're straight up lying to you or they're not. And, yeah, you're right. By anybody, because it does bring up sort of the next point in this story, which is Springfield, Ohio. Okay, so here's an AP fact check, and the only thing that we need to know about this fact check is that Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, has amplified debunked internet rumors about Haitian migrants.
Who debunked it?
Well, they did.
Nobody from the AP has been on the ground. Matter of fact, no, not even Fox, Newsmax. I mean, none of the right, channels have gone down there and visited and reported, at least that I've seen. Nobody goes there. They call up the county commissioner.
The city manager, I think, is who CNN said they called.
Come on, talk about dialing it in.
Or ABC.
I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, it's all dialed in. Here's the thing. The last thing they want to report is that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are, in fact, telling the truth, and that Haitian immigrants are grabbing the local ducks or geese or dogs or cats, and they're using them in, some sort of heathen foreign rituals. If you send somebody down there, they might find out it's true. Even if you don't believe it's true, there's always a possibility that it might be. It's better to just...
is it really that far-fetched? I mean, it's
a country where the primary religion is voodoo. It doesn't seem far-fetched to me. But you know what? The problem is we don't know. Because we have some people... And look, there have been some people, not mainstream media... The mainstream media isn't going out there to report on this, probably because they don't want to know. It would be better if you don't know. It's better if you call the city manager and him say, nope, that's not happening. That's just a weird internet rumor. And then you can run with that because you've talked to the city manager, maybe the mayor, and a city councilman or two, and they're all
Yeah, the
telling you,
cloak of authority.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're telling you everything is peachy. So you just accept their word, and then you can run with the fact check. Well, we've discussed with city officials, and they say it's not true. Okay, but there have been other people who've been going there, actually not mainstream media people, bloggers, podcasters, and stuff have been going to Ohio and just talking to people on camera. And
And that's revealed a hell of a lot more information than the mainstream media has.
yeah, it has. Now, is it true? Are they just saying it because
We
they have
still
some
don't
axe
know.
to grind? Yeah, we don't know. That is part of the crisis when all of your sense-making institutions are unreliable. You just don't know what to believe. And we were talking about this just before we came on, and you were saying that the people in the journalists suffer reputational damage, which is true, and I grant you that point. But they still have their jobs at the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Atlantic.
Yeah, they're not suffering the consequences from their employers because their employers don't give a shit. They are not trying to run news organizations. They are trying to run propaganda organizations, and that's left and right. I make no distinction between the two. That they are in a place where they are available to deliver information that they think helps their side,
Yeah, and like you said,
and only that information, and they ignore all other information.
and like you said, that's true for both, whether it's Fox News or Newsmax or
Yeah, I don't really find a whole lot
MSNBC.
of dissimilarity.
Yeah, well, it's the thing that Matt Taibbi pointed out a couple of years ago. Once they learned that the way that we make money with news is to find an audience and tell that audience what they want to hear, journalism died.
Yeah, well, let's face it. What the Weather Channel beat them years ago when every hurricane, every rainstorm, every snowstorm was a big deal, and you had to plant somebody there in the middle of the storm to make it look like it was a bigger deal than it was, and scared the piss out of every aunt and grandma. I mean, fear porn is alive and well, and it's been adopted by the mainstream media
And by the way,
and the lesser media too.
my favorite example of that is the reporter sitting in a canoe talking about the flooding that the city is experiencing. So she's in this canoe doing a live shot, and then all of a sudden in the background, you see a couple of fellows walking around in, knee-high water.
In boots, right?
Behind her. They've got hip waders on. They're fine. Why is she sitting in a canoe telling us about the horrific flooding? Everything
Or
is
like every Jim Cantori report where he is standing next to a stop sign that's like nearly bending over. Somebody goes walking by in the background like, hey.
yeah, and that's infected everything, and we can't trust what the government tells us. And by the way, if you're hearing a lot of barking in the background, that's because my dog has decided that it's very important to guard the house.
New puppy. Come on.
Yeah, new puppy. But I do have the door closed, but I can still hear it quite clearly coming through here. Oh, by the way,
We can hear it.
as an aside, we did get his DNA test back. We do know what kind of dog he is.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What is he?
He is a Belgian pit shepherd.
Pit Shepherd.
Yes.
That's an interesting
No,
mix.
he's a Belgian pit shepherd. He is 10% Belgian Malinois and 45% apiece German Shepherd and Pit Bull.
It's an interesting mix.
Yeah, it's a very interesting mix, and he doesn't look like any of them. So anyway, we got that back. So, but is Embark DNA telling me the truth? I don't know. I don't know that anybody is telling me the truth. To get back to our,
Have you ever done like any of those? What is it? 23andMe or whatever the other ones are. I won't even try
no.
because I'm like, how do you? Like, what are you actually telling me? oh, I come from this much Germany, this much Ireland, this much England, this much, Scandinavian. Wait, how do you even know that? Like, how does that? My people could have come from anywhere.
Yeah, well, the problem
And
with
they must have come from Africa at some point, right?
yeah, well, the problem with 23andMe is much worse. Read their terms of service.
Oh,
Once
what they used
yeah,
your stuff for, yeah.
yeah, once they have your genetic information, you have no control over it. They can use it for any purpose they want.
That's how they
So,
keep catching these criminals from like 30 years ago.
well, that may be true, I suppose. But
But the point being that
it makes it hard for you as a
it,
regular
it's a
person.
veneer, right? It's a veneer of accuracy, but underneath that veneer, what are they really saying? I mean, the best you can say about me or most white people is that you're probably of like northernish European stock, which, as far as we can trace it back, probably started out in the steppes of Russia, and then you got mixed with other stuff. So, I mean, you can't really tell me that much. You cannot tell me I'm 100% Irish. That doesn't make any sense. Nobody's 100% Irish. Nobody.
That's true. And by the way, like in my case, what would it matter? My family on both sides have been here, as far as I can tell, since before the American Revolution. One of my ancestors was actually the surgeon to Burnett's regiment during the Texas Revolutionary War. My family's been here for a long time. What does it matter if they came from Scotland or Ireland or Germany or France or whatever? Because for at least 3 centuries now, they've been Americans.
Right.
And they've been from this continent. So, sure, if you're curious and you want to do a 23andMe, go ahead, knock yourself out. And if you want to know what kind of
interesting, yeah,
yeah,
I think it's interesting. I just don't think it's accurate.
And if you want to find out what kind of Franken dog you rescued from the Humane Society, do a DNA test. And you find out you have a Belgian pit shepherd. Okay, great. But, I don't know how relevant it is to know that stuff. But we now know. We have a pretty good idea of what his background is. The people who pay the price to this legitimacy crisis are us. Because what is true? And not only what is true, but let's say that there are some problems in Springfield. Because here's the thing. The stuff that Donald Trump has been talking about in Springfield, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, blah, 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 blah. In fact, it's been a big meme that I've seen a lot of on YouTube Shorts, where showing dogs with shocked faces listening to Donald Trump saying, they're eating the dogs.
Eating the dogs.
They're eating the cat. Okay, fine. Are they? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But the people who've actually gone there and the residents who are there talking are saying things like, yeah, rents have tripled. Oh, and by the way, people are getting thrown out. Their houses are going up for rents. These immigrants are coming in at 3 times the price. Oh, and by the way, the mayor owns a lot of rentals.
Well, and they're getting kicked out of homeless shelters. They're getting kicked out of social services. I mean, look, it was a town of 60,000, and you brought in 20,000, 15,000 Haitians who were not assimilated. They're on the, what is it called? The temporary status, temporary something status. And they have no permanent plans. They may have permanent plans, but there's no official permanent plan for them to stay here.
Yeah, technically their status is they get to stay here legally until they can safely return to Haiti.
Right, which it's Haiti.
Yeah, so they'll be able
Haiti
to.
Has been a mess ever since the French were kicked out. So.
Yeah, so basically it will never be safe for any of them to return to Haiti, because Haiti is.
And they bring a whole different
shithole.
Culture. They don't assimilate. They don't speak English. They don't comport with the local values or even local driving laws. That's been one of the biggest complaints I've seen from Springfield residents, is that they don't know how to drive. And they have even one of them, at least, caused an accident that killed an 11-year-old kid. And there have been plenty of other accidents reported with involving these Haitian immigrants who don't have driver's license. They don't know how to drive. That they're not used to law and order. They have no assimilation whatsoever to American culture, American values, American ways of doing things.
But the problem is that for the press, it's really important for them to let us know that this is all just BS. These are false claims about Haitian migrants. The trouble is the real story, the actual story. It may be true that they are not going from house to house picking up cats and dogs and eating them or using them in voodoo rituals or whatever the whole thing is. But I bet there are other problems, and I bet if you were a real journalistic organization,
right,
you would send one or two people to spend a few days in Springfield, talk to some of the locals, head over to a diner, maybe hold a town hall meeting, and uncover, even if we accept arguendo that everything Donald Trump and J.D. Vance said about the cats and dogs is untrue, I bet there are other problems that you could uncover.
J.D. Vance has explicitly said so. Said, I don't know if I get the reports from my constituents, but I don't know if they're true or not. I haven't had the time to track them down. But it highlights a bigger problem. You can't just throw 20,000 people into a town of 60,000 and think that that's not going to change things.
But being able to say,
not change it for the better.
But being able to say Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are just repeating these debunked conspiracy theories allows you to not report on anything else. Even if it were true, even if arguendo, I would grant you that you're right. These are absolutely false stories. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump know they're false and are repeating those lies anyway. Okay, so what? The end of the story is not, hey, this specific problem is untrue and it's not happening. Right. The real story
Ace had a real good
what is true.
Right. Ace had a real good story or post about that. How they take some specific instance and say, well, this specific instance, no way. We have no information that's true. It's debunked. And then they use that to then say the same thing about the broader context. And that's no more honest than saying that, this specific instance is proliferating, that it's everywhere. It's the same dishonesty. You're using one small bit of information to taint the rest of the information, which you're not gathering, by the way. You're specifically avoiding.
Yeah, it's hard to escape the conclusion that the reason that you're not reporting on all those other issues is because you don't want to. Because it serves a narrative purpose for you just to debunk the most outrageous of the claims and leave everything, let sleeping dogs lie.
Right. And this gets us right back to the crisis of legitimacy.
Speaking of which, another thing happened this week that caught my mind. The Teamsters decided to ask their membership who they would support, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. If this had been 10 years ago, there would have been no doubt that the Teamsters would have supported whoever generic Democrat on the ballot was at the time. Labor has been in the hip pockets of the Democratic Party since the 50s.
About the 40s, yeah.
The 40s. What happened was that by about a 7-3 ratio, all of the Teamsters membership came back and said, yeah, we want Donald Trump to win.
Mm-hmm.
And
unsurprisingly.
Yeah, and so what do the Teamsters do? And I forget what the exact message is, and I don't think it's over in here, but what they just said was, well, we could not.
There was no clear consensus.
Yeah, there was no clear consensus on who the Teamsters wanted to support.
It was only 70-30.
I don't know, 70-30 seems to me to be a pretty clear consensus, but in fact, they didn't even say clear consensus. What they said is that there was no clear consensus for Kamala Harris, but there wasn't unanimous support for Donald Trump.
Right.
That was the
Okay.
statement they made. No clear support for Kamala Harris, but no, and they did say unanimous support for Donald Trump. Oh, so unanimous is the
Where's
standard
their
now.
unanimous support for any candidate
So
ever?
unanimous is the
Yeah,
standard.
right.
Okay. So sure, we would have loved to have endorsed Donald Trump, but he only got 70% of our membership's vote.
And still, that's actually a very good thing for Trump, and it should scare the bejesus out of the Harris camp, because we're now talking about Western Pennsylvania, all of Ohio, Northern Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, even parts of Minnesota. I mean, that are now very suspect for Kamala Harris, even beyond the cheating that is going to go on and most won't get caught. Um, that's a huge cohort of people. I mean, this is again the Rust Belt strategy that he used in 2016, and it used it quite effectively.
Okay, I have an interesting comment in chat. Sean Moeller says, unless it's threat of violence, I cannot understand the schism between members and leadership in unions. I have to admit, I don't know what that comment means.
I think I can decipher that. The union leaders tend to support Democrats because Democrats throw money their way in order to support the unions. And then the unions use some of that money and then donate the rest back towards the Democrats, including union dues.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
actual union members tend to be a lot more conservative, especially in like blue areas like New York, Long Island. All the union members on Long Island, they're for Donald Trump. The union leadership is not. You could say the same thing about Illinois, about Ohio, about Western Pennsylvania, Michigan. The Teamsters, they're based out of Michigan, right? Well, I know they have headquarters in DC, but they're basically based out of Michigan. The leadership cozies up to the politicos, and the members are just voting based on their own interests. And they see in Donald Trump somebody who understands the work they do, the value that they bring, and is protecting them from foreign invaders. That's sort of important to a union member. They don't want to see their wages go down.
I think also we have seen an increasing schism between union leadership and union membership for the past 20 years. I mean, if this was like 1980, you could pretty much count on a union member being solidly Democrat. I just don't.
Maybe in 1980. By 1984, I think they had started switching.
Well, I mean, look, Reagan was. There were other things than union stuff going on in the 84 election.
Right.
But I think once both George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton both jumped on the globalization bandwagon, that union members since then, so I think we can take it back to 1995-ish, 1996-ish or so, union members began to feel that there was just not enough support for domestic manufacturing in either party. Although to the extent that there was support, there was always the wing of conservatism that felt that globalization was going to be bad. Sure, there were some people on the left that felt that. Bernie Sanders is one of them. But I think the nexus of anti-free trade stuff was kind of in that Pat Buchanan wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I was going to say, but they had poor messengers in the GOP, and they had poor messengers in the Democratic Party. Um, they were not able to effectively communicate the changes that were coming. And then you had the greatest communicator after Reagan. And I don't know, kind of similar. Bill Clinton was an incredibly effective communicator. And he put people's minds at ease. He made them feel comfortable. He was very, very slick, very, very good at retail politics.
But at the end
It
of the
worked.
day, yeah, but at the end of the day, when we see the end result of that level of
Right.
globalization, it was what Democrats call the hollowing out of American manufacturing. Okay, we can have all kinds of economic arguments about free trade, and in fact, one of these days, I'd like to have that discussion.
We're going to have to do a probably no audience podcast.
Yeah, might have to just pre-record one just to talk about.
Maybe we should get Jim Lakely to come on.
Yeah, exactly, because I think he would be, 100% behind globalization, and I think I am less so. So I think that might be an interesting conversation. But in any event, now we're being told by the unions that, well, we can't endorse anybody, but there's a clear preference among your union members.
Right.
So why are you withholding the endorsement?
Does it matter in the end?
No,
A matter of fact, it matters a bigger deal, I think, for the Democrats than it does for the Republicans. They don't expect to get those endorsements.
yeah. Well,
And they haven't gotten
they're calling it a warning sign.
right. And I think it's the Democrats that should be worried about that. Trump has clearly touched the blue collar class, as it were. They feel that he gets them. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Well, again, this takes us back to our crisis of legitimacy stream that's running through this thing. And this time it's a crisis of political legitimacy. In addition to not being told the truth by the media, one of our major, at least politically related institutions, and not being told the truth by politicians, as we saw from the Jay Varna thing, and all of COVID was just a huge pack of lies. I forget who it was. I think it was Michael Schellenberg who said, during COVID, the biggest disseminator of disinformation was the U.S. government. In addition to that, it is a failure of governance in that, and we've talked about this before, the only reason Donald Trump is running now, and the only reason that he's running neck and neck with Kamala Harris, whether he wins or not, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly, polling indicates that he's not going to win this election. But the fact that he is there, that he exists, is a symptom of a political system where both parties, and you hear this a lot, people who are on the Trump side, they use the term uniparty a lot. Because there is a growing feeling.
Well, so do we.
Yeah, well,
We've been talking about that for years.
Yeah, and there's a growing feeling, and I think it's a valid one, and it's one, as you've pointed out, we've talked about for years. Both parties exist to basically, get reelected, and the way that you get reelected is to get powerful interests on your side. And so we have both parties that talk a good game about their different policies and about how they're going to change America. And look, sometimes we actually get little bits of it here. We get, tax cuts or what have you. But at the end of the day, the policies never change. The things that affect Americans and free trade, globalization has been one of them. Both parties say, yeah, you know what? We're going to need more free trade, and we're going to need to ship a lot of jobs off to China because, they're jobs Americans don't want to do. Well, not at the price you're willing to pay the Chinese, no. Immigration is another one. Both the Republicans and the Democrats, for different reasons, are perfectly happy to have a wide open border. We have policies that have, or parties that have two completely different and ostensibly diametrically opposed rhetoric. Yet it's funny how we get the same policies.
Well, and it's the nouveau regime. I mean, because it's not just here. They're in cohorts with Europe, China, Russia, India. I mean, it's Canada, Mexico. I mean, it isn't a country specific issue.
No, it's not. The governing class in the entire Western world,
Right.
has moved to basically the same ideology. And
It looked very much like the Ancien regime, where, you know, look, we're in charge. We need to take care of you because you don't know how to take care of yourselves. So we're going to lay down the policies and we're going to take care of you. You just need to love us and listen to us because we know what's in your best interest. You don't. It was like what Bill Clinton said. Well, we give you the money, but we're not so sure that you're going to spend it the right way.
yeah, like you're better at
That is
spending,
essentially what it is.
yeah, you're better at living my life than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's this paternalistic, we know what's better for you. And look, sometimes, never mind the rhetoric, the parties just lie. The Conservative Party, who've been running Great Britain for, what, the last 12 years,
Yeah.
we're
Prior to
constantly,
now, yeah.
prior to now, we're constantly talking about how they were going to reduce immigration, get control of Britain's borders, blah, 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 blah.
They
blah.
couldn't even figure out Brexit.
Oh, yeah. Elect us. You said you wanted Brexit. Elect us. We'll get it done. No, you won't. We'll go through 3 prime ministers before you come up with any sort of agreement with the EU on what Brexit means. And it will be, in almost every respect, a agreement that punishes the United Kingdom. And then they talked about immigration and how they're going to get control of their borders. They never did. And they've ended up with... Still haven't. So does it matter?
Individual countries have done something, and then they get called out as racist. I mean, look at Hungary.
Yeah, Hungary under Viktor Orban. Basically,
Poland,
who is a Nazi?
Sweden. You know, I mean, these are, especially the Scandinavian countries, who are actually probably are the most equality-based functioning governments in the world, high functioning governments. They get called out as, racist and whatever else, because they're like, you know what, we're bringing in too many immigrants who aren't assimilating. They're taking over entire towns. We need to kind of, put some brakes on here. And Scandinavians are notorious for being very welcoming, very open, very generous, and really trying to make newcomers feel special and part of everything that they do. That's just who they are. Well, when it's kind of similar to what we talked about with Springfield. You overwhelm a country with so many immigrants who don't assimilate, don't have even like an approximate understanding of what the culture and values are of where they're now living. It does not create good outcomes.
Yeah, but those are all outliers.
Right. Those are all out. They have to be.
Because if you look at Germany, and of course Germany is always a little, how shall we say it, concerned about how their dealings with minority groups might be perceived outside of Germany. But it doesn't matter.
This is the best outcome for Deutschland.
Yeah. But France, Great Britain, Ireland, Spain. I mean, they all basically have the same sort of immigration policies, and the elites in those countries are all for them. And look, there is a reason why that nobody ever wants really to talk about, and that is the demographic collapse in Western countries.
Yep.
Because
And Victor David Hanson is about the only one who talks about this regular. There are other people that talk about it, obviously, but Victor David Hanson talks about this quite often and has been putting it out for literally like 20 years.
Yeah, and if you don't have any confidence in your own culture, you're certainly not going to have children, and people just don't have children. Or as Peter Zion puts it, when you live on a farm in a rural area, kids are free labor. If you're an urban professional, kids are a very expensive hobby.
Extremely expensive.
And so people in the West have stopped having children. But the trouble is, let's take the United States. We're not as far along as the Europeans are. Our demographics...
We're getting close, though.
Yeah, our demographics are bad, but they're not yet catastrophic. But how do you think Social Security is going to work if we're not reproducing at replacement rate?
We've known that. Look, Dale, you and I have long ago given up the idea that Social Security is going to pay for anything for us in our future, right? I mean, that's just sort of our generational thing. And I know you're technically a boomer, but you're basically Gen X. We have no expectation that government handouts are going to take care of us. We just look at it as another fucking tax, which is all it is. So, okay, I just don't want my children to have to pay for it. That's my number one, issue is, look, I'll take the hit, but don't charge my children for something they're never going to get.
Well, the way that
they don't need to pay for me. They don't need to pay for me. I'll take care of it.
The way that they're going to try to do that is to bring in a whole bunch of immigrants who will actually do the jobs.
That's exactly what they're doing.
We don't replace our population. And look, from a policy point of view, what choice do you have? You cannot maintain the social welfare system. And look, compared to Europe, America's social welfare system absolutely sucks. As expensive as it is, it sucks. But
it's certainly a lot less generous, yes.
Yeah. However, people depend on Social Security and other benefits that are paid for by the payroll taxes of people who are still working. And if we are going to have 2 retirees, which is basically, by the way, where China is going to be in another 5 or 6 years, they're going to have more than 1 retiree for every person who is working.
We've already seen this come to fruition.
Yeah, and by the way, Germany's in the same problem. France is in the same boat. Britain is in the same boat. So when you talk about why do they want...
everybody in Europe is in the same boat.
Why do they want all these immigrants to come in here? Well, because if they can't, then you're going to have to shut down your entire social welfare system because you can no longer afford it.
And yet, most of the people that they're bringing in are not producing anything. You're paying for them to be there. Exorbitant prices.
Well, that's the
problem. But that being aside, we've already seen this happen. When GM hit its last crisis, the problem was that it was essentially a company that was paying retiree benefits and didn't have enough workers or revenue to support that. It was an inverted system.
Right.
Of course, the government bailed them out. They sold off, what they could, the parts, division and whatever else. And they made new contracts. What was it? They made a big deal with Fiat and wherever else. But it's never cured the problem that you can't set up a Ponzi scheme unless you have more suckers coming into the system.
Yeah, but
when you have less suckers coming into the system, it's going to go broke.
But every social welfare scheme in the West, including in the United States, is a Ponzi scheme. And it can only work as long as you have enough new investors,
Right.
workers, who come in who can be taxed to pay for the outgoing workers. And the second
And
that
that's what's so
becomes
stupid about this immigration system is that we're not even, most of them aren't even getting taxed. They're living off of taxes, off of taxes that we pay. They aren't adding to the overall value of America. They're actually a suck on the system. I mean, Milton Friedman talked about this back in the freaking 70s, 60s, and 70s. Why you can't do this.
you can have a welfare state or you can have open borders. Choose one.
Right. And that's your only two decisions. That's it. You
And
cannot have one if you have the other. It doesn't work.
yeah, and by the way, if you're older than 60 and you think you're getting Social Security, well, good luck with that. Whether a country that is $35 trillion in debt now. Oh, and also debt service. Have you seen what debt service is now? Our annual interest payments on the national debt now top $1 trillion.
Which, what, 25 years ago or so was over budget, yet still within standard means of like of our government paying for everything.
Yeah,
Now that's just one line item.
we could,
One.
and people talk about budget cutting and all of that stuff. Look, you could cut out everything the government does. Everything the federal government does. Send Congress home, fire everybody in all the executive departments, disband the military, shut it all down. And we still would not have enough revenue to balance the budget. Social Security and Medicare and interest on the national debt alone, those payments exceed all of the federal government's revenues.
Yeah, it's like $4 trillion. So we can't, and what we bring in about 2.8, it might be a little over 3 now, but we don't generate enough. And this is what drives me crazy. Oh, jobs are going up. How many of them are government jobs? Well, a lot of them.
Most of them.
It's like, so it's a suck on the economy. That isn't adding value to the economy. It's sucking out of the economy. Now we're taking dollars that, if in the free market, which we haven't had in forever, might produce something and create jobs, create productivity, create all those things that make us prosperous, are now being sucked down to government jobs that don't produce anything, are literally a suck on the economic activity of America. I mean, we've seen this happen when your economy is over 30%, when 30% of your GDP is paying for government services, employees, whatever else, you're standing on a precipice. Once it keeps going up, you're just heading towards a disaster.
Yeah, in
And
fact,
we've seen this. This is historical. We actually know the outcome.
I'm actually kind of curious because I didn't look it up until you just mentioned it. So here you go. This is Wikipedia, so you can believe as much of it as you like. 36.2% of GDP
I mean, that's just a ridiculous amount.
is government spending. Now, of course,
It's over a third.
that includes federal, state, and local. But yes, it is substantially above a third of all GDP is government. And by the way, government produces no goods, although There are some services they produce, but most of what government does is transfer payments. They transfer payments from the productive sector of the economy. And
They take good money and turn it into giveaways.
36.2%. So you want to talk about
I mean,
something
that's a
that's
ridiculous
unsustainable?
number.
Yeah, it's unsustainable.
Of course, it's unsustainable. I mean, it's pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
And
There's if there's nothing being produced, you're not getting ahead. You're just getting behind.
but this is where, from chat, this is where we bet whether or not we see very high inflation for a short period or 5 to 10% inflation for years. I think there is a third option where we go the Brazil/Argentina route, and we see
Beggar thy neighbor, yeah.
and we see very high inflation for a very long time.
Yeah, I would. It would not surprise me, although the Fed is doing rate cuts, and oh my God,
Yeah.
let's just let's just hurry ourselves into recession. Now, look, I think we've been in a recession, in and out, just slightly above, and then in for probably 4 years, 5 years. I don't see how cutting interest rates is going to help. I know that the idea is to help boost the economy and get more cash out there into the ether, but it's if over 36% of it is just going to government, what have you actually accomplished? All you've done is inflated the money supply.
Yes, and despite what modern monetary theory says, there are going to be repercussions for that. Unfortunately,
Why does anybody believe modern monetary? Like literally, Dale, tell me,
it's a
why
religious
does anybody believe that shit?
it's a religious belief, just like trans ideology and all of that other stuff.
It has to be, right? Because
Yeah.
we have econometrics going back a couple hundred years, if not a little more. We know that you can't inflate your way out of, a depression. Like, we literally have historical facts to show this. Well, how is it possible to think that inflation doesn't really exist? I just don't even understand the thinking.
And look, here's the real problem that the United States has that no other country in the world has. If you're Great Britain or Germany or France or Italy, and Italy and Spain or Greece, great examples of it. Italy's standard, and so has Spain's, standard response to anything has been, let's devalue the currency.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember being TDY in Italy back in 1986 and getting our weekly per diem payments. And they would come out and they would hand our weekly per diem payments to us in 100,000 lira notes.
Mm-hmm.
And look, if you're Italy, you can do that. And whatever inflationary contagion doesn't go anywhere but Italy. If you are the
You're not
world's
exactly selling things overseas at that point.
Yeah, if you are the world's reserve currency, where pretty much all
bigger deal.
international deals, like the price of oil, if it's all denominated in dollars and we go into hyperinflation, nobody's going to want to use those dollars, which means we will not be the world's reserve currency, and all of those dollars are going to get sold to come back to the United States.
Right. Which, if we didn't have hyperinflation before that,
We'd
will
certainly have it
accelerate.
after that.
Right.
So we're in
And
this.
what are they going to buy
Yeah,
if
so-
we don't make anything?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess on the plus side, the dollar will be so worthless that manufacturing can come back in a big, big way. because our exports will be cheaper than China's.
These union members going to have to get used to paying being paid like $3 an hour.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I just don't. Again, it's this whole thing is all religious belief. We have so much religiously based ideology that is being shoved down our throats by people who think they are smarter and wiser and more capable of controlling our lives than we are. And it
You know
is
who
all
personifies that to a T is Robert Reich, who, if you all don't know, Dale had the chance to interview him back in the 90s.
Yeah, while he was Secretary of Labor. Yeah, I
Yeah.
interviewed him when I was working on Money Radio in Los Angeles.
And he pretends to be an economist. He's not.
He's a lawyer.
And he doesn't understand the first thing about economics. But he talks a good game. He talks a good Keynesian game. And, you know, he's always confident, always wrong.
Yeah, never in doubt, but often wrong. But, you know, there was a weird...
I've listened to that interview too, and it's really good.
There is this 10% of people in our culture who are trying to force an ideology on the other 90%. And unfortunately, that 10% happens to be in all of the sense-making institutions. And I saw this week, for those of you who don't know or play anything about video games, I do play video games. And there's a studio called BioWare. You've heard of Mass Effect, the video games. It's like a timeless classic produced by BioWare. They have another IP, Dragon Age. It's dark medieval fantasy. And they're about to release Dragon Age 4 Veilguard. Now, remember, this takes place in a medieval dark fantasy setting where there's, you know, magic and where you can be transformed into, you know, a horse by a mage. And in the character creator for Veilguard, not only do you get to choose your pronouns, which all of the other characters will refer to you by, you also get to choose to have top surgery scars.
Good God.
In a world of magic where mages can perform, they can literally transform you into a different creature, they believe there's going to be top surgery. Why would you ever do that? But of course, the person who runs Dragon Age, the game director, is a transgender woman. So he's making sure that we get that thrown down our face. And in fact, this last week, there was a complete, and this is, by the way, a positive sign. After spending $400 million to create a video game called Concord, where you could play as non-binary, transgender, you know, well, we can't call them fat anymore. Well, whatever the current term is for plus size people. You could play all of these things, right? And, well, let's just say that after their release, their peak player count on Steam was 627 people.
What?
Yes, less than 2 weeks after release, after $400 million of development.
Oh my God.
People were so pissed off about this game that no one bought it, and Sony has now pulled it. It is a dead game. It lasted 2 weeks.
Wow.
Why is it so important that you shove this down our throat? And, you know, the entertainment industry is rife with it. We can talk about, you know, Acolyte, and it's really interesting. Go in and look at Rotten Tomatoes and compare audience scores for a particular property with critic scores. In fact, let's do that. Let's look up Star Wars Acolyte, Rotten Tomatoes,
Oh, Acolyte. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and let's pull that up in Rotten Tomatoes and let's see what they say. Okay, so the Tomatometer, which are the critics' reviews, give it a 78% score. The average audience score is 18%.
Yeah, people really did not like it. Well, space witches and whatever the hell.
Here we go. 83% for the critics, 48% from the audience. They are bound and determined, whether the audience likes it or not, to just shove it down your throat. Same sort of ideology, and in this case, of course, it's the strong, powerful woman who, is running everything in The Lord of the Rings. These people think they're better
That
than
was
we
the other
are,
thing.
and
Yeah,
they are.
Did you actually watch any of that?
What, Rings of Power?
Yeah,
No, absolutely
it
not.
was awful. I
Absolutely
watched one
not.
episode. It was horrible.
All I had to see was the trailer to realize this was going to be woke garbage. And Star Wars Acolyte is woke garbage. And
Yeah, space witches who
when they
don't
fail,
need.
they blame the audience,
Yep.
not themselves,
Well, of
for
course.
producing something that people don't want to watch. Oh, and by the way, in Veilguard, the new Dragon Age game, if you play a female character, you cannot adjust the breast size larger than an A cup.
They
Because,
don't want males playing those characters.
the male gaze is problematic.
Well,
Which is weird because
good luck, ladies.
women gamers don't want to play ugly women characters either.
No,
But
I would imagine they want to.
But it doesn't matter, because everything is in the service of this ideology, and every single cultural institution is trying to shove it down our throat. So the 90% of us who don't really want to deal with it are just inundated with it. You can't escape it. Again, this crisis of legitimacy. We are being told that we have to assert things that are untrue are true.
And that's what fuels the pushback, right? That people obviously understand these things aren't true. I mean, it's clear they aren't true. And yet, this is why Matt Walsh is so popular as a blogger, because he just insists on taking it right to the source and saying, so you want me to believe that this is true? Well, okay, here are my issues with that, right? And they can never come up with a convincing answer. They just look like absolute fools, because let's face it, they are. They have no answer because they've made up this entire system. There's no logic behind it. We were never given an argument as to why this might be a preferable way of looking at things, or even a true way of looking at things. We've never been given any logical, factual argument. There's certainly, they pretend that there are studies, but all the studies that they talk about are, we'll look at all these people who commit suicide. Yeah, okay. But you have literally nothing definitive, empirical, to show me that the recipes you're offering, the cures that you're offering, will affect this in any way. Matter of fact, if I look at the actual data, it doesn't seem to make a difference. In some cases, it may even be more harmful. So, what are you actually showing me? And that's one of the reasons I love Matt Walsh.
Well,
Guy never went to college.
speaking of
And
which, his movie Am I Racist, with only 11 reviews are in, and so I find his tomatometer score surprisingly high at 73%,
really,
but his popcorn meter number is 98%.
that's pretty good.
But there are only 11
But
reviews
yeah,
in for
it's
the
not
movie.
whole lot of reviews.
Yeah, it's 11 reviews. So again, I expect that 73% is going to drop, and it's going to drop pretty quickly once
Oh,
the
he's gonna get a hate
critics
bomb. Yeah.
reviews come in. But 98% will probably not change substantially once all the critic reviews are in.
Well, I never saw the whole movie, and I actually want to. What is a woman? The parts I did see were very enlightening. Like when he went to Africa, that was really, really interesting. They were just like, what are you talking about? Like, there's just man and woman. We don't even know what you're talking about. And frankly, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, that would have been the reaction by anybody and everybody. What are you talking about?
There has been a concerted effort to push this ideology in every cultural institution, and we're expected to knuckle under. And by the way,
Yeah.
I am self-censoring myself at the moment because I know there are certain things that if I were to say them would get this podcast removed from YouTube.
Yeah. That's just insane. Like that literally is insane. That you can't say truthful things on an open content channel because it might get you censored and banned. That's the antithesis of freedom, of everything that we have worked for, our ancestors have worked for in this country.
And by the way, what I've increasingly noticed, especially over the last couple of months, is the increasing use of euphemisms for common words. Killed, raped, murdered.
I haven't really noticed that. Yeah.
People are now
on like X and YouTube and whatever. Yeah.
X of all places.
Unalived.
Unalived.
Like
that's the word.
Yeah, that's the big one.
I unalived him. Well,
Right.
you have to say that because
It's like, what?
if you say killed, you're going to raise a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And
isn't that kind of screwed up? I mean, there are appropriate times to use the word.
there is a concerted effort to prevent you from saying true things.
Mm-hmm.
It's the emperor has no clothes writ large.
Well, yeah, with an enforcement of media and news types to reinforce that value. We don't get a say.
And by the way, Matt Walsh's movie was number 3 in box office this last weekend.
Was it really?
Yeah.
It had to be a limited. I doubt he got it into many theaters.
Well,
It wasn't around any theaters I'm in.
well, you don't know that. You know why? Because no one is advertising it. Sure, you can see advertisements on social media and on, sort of conservative media, but outside of that, mainstream media, nobody is marketing this film. Outside of outside of the Daily Wire. And I've seen several clips of it, like with what's her name? Who's that Soraya Rao or whatever her name is, who's sitting there with all of these DEI people talking about how, living in the United States today is no different than living in Nazi Germany.
Who said that? Oh, I know who you're talking about. The New York Times pundit,
Yeah,
Sarah Rao.
yeah, yeah. No different than living in Nazi Germany.
Well, actually, it is showing. You know what? I'm going to go tomorrow.
Well, there you go. So support Matt Walsh or Matt Walsh.
I will. I really like him. I think he's absolutely hilarious and absolutely fearless. And I respect that so much. I think that's just so
I
cool.
respect it. I disagree with him on some stuff. I think he's
I don't agree with him on everything, but I don't agree with anybody on it. Even you and I have disagreements, and we're about as simpatico as you can get.
but in the greater culture, telling the truth, it's gotten to the point where telling the truth is an act of courage. And by the way, this is one of the things that worries me about
Or
X.
an act of insurrection.
One of the things that worries me about X is that while Elon Musk has been pretty good about making X into a free speech platform, although I'm still seeing the asterisk phenomena on X, which I don't even understand.
I
What
don't know what
happens,
the asterisk. What's the asterisk thing?
you know, replacing the U in suicide or the LL
But
in
that's self
killers?
censorship, right?
And yeah, but I mean, what it is people who are afraid to write the truth because they're afraid they're going to get canceled or they're
Yeah.
afraid that
No.
they're,
Yeah. That's right. That no. It's a good point.
self-censorship is what you do whenever you don't want to suffer the pain of telling the truth. So it's basically what I do when we talk about transgender ideology here. Although I'm going to stop saying it, it is not possible for you to change your biological sex. Full stop. And anyone who says it is possible to change your biological sex is a fool or a liar. Those are not mutually exclusive either.
True.
And yet to say that risks getting this episode of the podcast pulled off of YouTube
Which is
or receive a
lunacy.
strike on the channel as a content warning.
Right. And that's lunacy.
And
Because, like you said, you're penalized for telling the truth.
and the only
This is the truth.
and the only social media site where you can reasonably expect to be treated fairly as long as you are speaking in, you know, adult legal speech is X. And what happens if Elon Musk gets hit by a bus? Because the amount of censorship on Instagram, Threads, which is Meta's new thing, Facebook, Tumblr, any of them is so enormous and so egregious. I mean, Facebook is a great example where if you post anything other than cute puppies or fuzzy kitties, you are quite liable to have your post just instantly removed and you perhaps to be suspended. The level of censorship on sort of the public media that most people have access to. And of course, it goes beyond this because GoFundMe or Patreon may simply shut down your GoFundMe or Patreon setup because they don't like what you're saying. And Amazon may not allow you to use AWS to store the files for your website or whatever it may be. There is a concerted effort to force you to tell the lie that they want you to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not, of course.
Again, this is a very good example of the crisis of legitimacy. These are the companies that we depend on to connect to the world. And they don't trust us to communicate with each other.
No, because you're
We have
liable
to
to spout
conform
some.
to the way
Yeah.
they want us to.
Because if you don't, you're spouting misinformation or disinformation. And we can't allow that because that's a threat to our very democracy. Not allowing you to
We don't have-
speak or allowing you to speak is a threat to democracy. That's an interesting bow to tie that up with, isn't it?
Right.
You know,
Well,
I'd
kind of
love to
like
let you have free speech, but you might say the wrong thing. To
well, it's
paraphrase
kind of like
Bill Clinton.
nominating a presidential candidate who never received a single primary vote
Yeah, you got to
ever.
you have to defend democracy by just electing a candidate. And by the way,
Mhm.
Nancy Pelosi came out last week and said something to the effect of, "Well, you know, we had an open primary and we elected Kamala Harris."
I the
What?
willingness to lie and to soak up the lie with no pushback is again, this is why nobody trusts the media. You know,
However,
seriously, we all know how it happened.
but look, on the bright side, none of this may matter in another couple of weeks.
Okay, I know where you're going here, and it's
Because apparently we're on the verge of going to war with Russia and China. And if it's not going to war with Russia and China, who, by the way, are constantly testing our both sea and air defense zones in Alaska,
yep.
and they've been doing it for a couple of weeks now, still there in the background is the other trigger for World War III, Israel. So, you know, all of this, you know, might be of limited interest as we are. Why are you barking? He's barking. He's in the office.
He's excited.
Okay.
He's agreeing with you.
He's barking at a picture of a dog on my other monitor. It's a desktop. And I have a picture of a dog. So he is okay. That's enough. But there we go. Proof that I have a dog. Why don't you go back in the living room and play with your little chew toy? My hand is not your chew toy. No. Sorry about that.
He wants to play.
He wants to play. He's getting a little bored because we've been in here for a while. But yeah, speaking of the crisis of legitimacy, how are we back in the Cold War? How did we get ourselves back into a situation where we are on the verge of another shooting war, either with the Russians and the Chinese, or because of some horrific escalation in the Middle East?
Well, we know. Look, cozying up to Iran was always a bad idea. I know it was recommended by that 9/11 commission that we switch, turn the tables, take Saudi Arabia out and switch to Iran because we thought we could control Russia. That was dumb when they suggested it. We also know that China and Russia have been getting closer and closer, not just militarily, but also financially. And they have enough clout to change world politics. They have been openly working on changing the dollar from the measurement that we use for all world goods.
Yes, they want to
creating a
replace
different basket.
They want to replace the dollar as the world currency, the world's reserve currency, with the whole BRICS initiative, which also thank you Brazil and India for playing their game.
Yeah, right. Well, look, I mean, I don't blame Brazil or India. I don't actually blame any of them. Look, if you show signs of weakness, you're going to get competitors. I mean, that's just how it works. So I don't blame anybody for trying to undermine us. What I do blame is our complete inefficacy in defending the dollar. We do nothing we do everything to devalue the dollar and do nothing to defend the dollar. And I don't want to get deep into the economics here, especially this late into the podcast, but yes, we face some uh, some foreign threats as exhibited by that Alaska thing. Um, I mean, that's minor potatoes, but it does lead to a bigger conclusion that we can't just, walk astride in this world without facing competition. And if we're not going to face the competition, if we're going to actually compete against the competition, then they're going to diminish us. We are the 800-pound gorilla. Either we act like it or we don't. I think that we could be a very good conciliatory, not like a bad drug dealer, just like a good drug dealer. You want to buy some crack?
But look, it goes beyond that. I mean, look at the policy with Ukraine. We'll take it as a given that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was absolutely wrong. However, we are now 2.5 years into this war. It shows no sign of ending. Russia is not going to pull out. Our sanctions against them have driven them into the arms of China. And China, with their own problems, need allies. And so Russia's looking like a very good one.
And this is one thing we never, ever, ever, ever wanted, was for China and Russia to get together. It was something we actively worked against for half a century.
But here we are, and no one seems interested in ending the conflict in Ukraine and thus relieving the Russian sanctions, and other than an absolute victory by Ukraine. And while I understand
which is
that,
never going to happen.
Yeah, the Ukrainians can't pull off an absolute victory. And while it was
No.
amusing to see the Russians get embarrassed,
And they have been.
at some point Russian embarrassment translates itself into something darker. And there is
retaliation.
and there is a limit to how much you can embarrass a nuclear armed power that has missiles pointed at Chicago, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. There's a limit to the amount of risk. I think in terms of realpolitik, Ukraine is never getting Crimea back. Ever.
Or the Donbass, yeah.
Too much of Russia's military or naval strength requires a naval base in Crimea to control the Black Sea. And they're just not going to give that up.
It's literally been their aim for centuries. Since like Peter the Great.
At some point, you have to come up with a modus vivendi. And we are so locked in, certainly on all across the West, are so locked into Russia has to lose this and Ukraine has to go back. We have to go back to status quo ante, or no deal can be on the table. And by the way, there's talk that Ukraine was willing to listen to a Russian deal, but the Brits and the Americans talked them out of it.
I had not heard that. Okay.
Which, by the way, is not our job.
No.
And so we are just strategically, forget the monetary policy stuff, forget the economic stuff. We are strategically drawing ourselves into a smaller and smaller box. And people say, well, Donald Trump is, a Russian tool and he'll just give away Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe. All I know is that we don't get into these extended wars until the Uniparty decides that we get into them. And they never end. I mean, they never end. We don't have... World War II was the last war where we had an objective that would finish the war. And we finished it. We did it. After that, we've never been able to finish a war. Not one.
And it does lead one to ask, What purpose does it serve? Who benefits
Mm-hmm.
from keeping
Cui bono.
the Russians tied down in Ukraine year after year after year and imposing sanctions on them year after year after year? At some point, people have got to stop dying. The Russians aren't going to do it. The Ukrainians aren't going to go anywhere. They can't. Although 2
And
million
I don't believe
Ukrainians
that
have ended up
those
in Poland.
Russian oligarchs are at all restrained from using their influence, power, and money to expand their resources. I think we've shut down some obvious things, taking their yachts. Okay, great. Um, what have we really done though? They still travel.
Well,
They still go other places.
you can say that Ukraine is still an independent country. It's not a puppet state of Russia, unlike Belarus, which is true. But, how much are we willing to risk for Ukraine? At some point, we have to ask.
Who do you ask?
Well, ourselves. Is Kiev worth Chicago? Is Kharkiv worth Los Angeles?
Not in my mind.
Because at some point, that's what it comes down to.
But look, I would say the same thing about Jerusalem. If it came down to that, no, Jerusalem is not worth, DC or New York or wherever else. But now we're talking different metrics, right? Because the only nuclear power involved there is Israel.
Israel.
Well, possibly Pakistan.
Oh, okay. Granted, Pakistan is involved. But, they say that decline is a choice. And as far as I can tell, when given a choice, our leadership chooses decline every single time.
This was Obama's playbook. He literally said, we need to take ourselves down a step or two. I mean, literally, those weren't the words out of his mouth, but
yeah,
theoretically, he said that we need to actually take America back from the brink and be more conciliatory towards the rest of the world. And so he went out on his apology tour. He fundamentally tried to change America. Well, this is what we're living with.
Yeah, well, as far as I can tell, he did a pretty good job of doing it.
He was very successful.
Yeah, very quietly, he managed to change quite a lot of stuff. But that is a topic for another time, because we've reached our time for today. Michael, as always, pleasure talking to you. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, brother. See ya.
See ya. You've been watching the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 22nd of September, 2024. Thanks for watching. We'll look for you again next time. Until then, so long.